Sarah Miller stared at the smashed photo frame on the floor, glass shards reflecting the afternoon light that streamed through the bay windows of their Boston home. Her hand trembled as she knelt to pick up the wedding photo. Her parents, David and Helen, smiling on their special day 30 years ago. That smile seemed like a lie now. "I never meant for you to find out this way," her father said from the doorway, his voice low and rough with emotion. Sarah couldn't look at him. 28 years, Dad. 28 years you've been lying to Mom. To me. Her fingers tightened around the photo, creasing the edges. "And I had to find out from Uncle Robert at Thanksgiving dinner? Really?" David stepped into the living room, careful to avoid the glass. His usually confident posture had collapsed into something smaller, something wounded. "It wasn't. It's complicated, Sarah." Complicated. The word tasted bitter. Having a whole other family in Chicago while pretending to be the perfect husband and father here isn't complicated. It's cruel. The revelation had come during what should have been a normal family dinner. Uncle Robert, 3 glasses of wine deep, had casually mentioned running into David with his other kid at a Cubs game. The silence that followed had been deafening. Her mother's face had drained of color, and Sarah's world had tilted on its axis. "Your mother knew," David said quietly. "Not about Thomas, but about Diane. We had an arrangement." Sarah's head snapped up. "An arrangement? Mom knew you were cheating on her." "It wasn't cheating if she knew." David ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture so familiar it made Sarah's chest ache. "We married young, for practical reasons. Her parents were traditional. Mine needed the connection to her family's business. We cared for each other, but stop." Sarah held up her hand. "I don't want to hear about your loveless marriage. Where's Mom now?" David sank into the armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 55 years. "She's at Aunt Judith's. She needed space." Sarah laughed, a hollow sound that didn't belong to her. "Space?" After finding out her husband has a 20-year-old son she never knew about. She set the photo down on the coffee table with deliberate care. "Does Thomas know about us?" A flash of pain crossed David's face. "No. Diane and I agreed it was better that way." "Better for who?" Sarah stood, needing to move, to do something with the energy vibrating through her body. "Not for Thomas, who thinks his father just travels a lot for business. Not for Mom, who's been sharing you all these years without knowing there was a child involved. Certainly not for me." David leaned forward. "Sarah, please. I love you. You're my daughter. Nothing changes that. Everything changes that." The words burst from her like a dam breaking. "My entire childhood feels like a lie. Those business trips to Chicago twice a month? You were going to your other family. Those weekend phone calls when you couldn't make it to my swim meets? You were probably at Thomas's baseball games." David flinched. "I never missed your important events." "But you missed his, right?" Sarah grabbed her coat from the back of the couch. "God, Dad, you failed everyone. Where are you going?" David stood quickly, panic edging into his voice. Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "I'm going to see Mom. And then, I don't know. Maybe I'll go to Chicago." "Sarah, don't what? Don't tell Thomas he has a half-sister? Don't blow up your carefully constructed double life." She turned to face him, struck by how small he looked standing amid the wreckage of their family photos. "You know what's funny? All those lessons you taught me about honesty, about integrity. Was that just for show?" David stepped forward, reaching for her. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I love both my children. I love your mother in my way. And yes, I care for Diane too. How convenient for you." Sarah opened the door, letting in a gust of cold January air. "The rest of us don't get to divide our hearts so easily. Sarah, please, let's talk about this." She hesitated, one foot already on the porch. Part of her, the little girl who had idolized her father, wanted to stay, to understand, to forgive. But the adult she'd become, the woman who had just had her foundation shattered, couldn't do it. "Not yet. I need time," she said finally, echoing her mother's need for space. "Don't call me. I'll call you when I'm ready." She closed the door behind her, cutting off whatever response he might have made. Her car sat in the driveway, covered in a light dusting of snow. As she slid into the driver's seat, her phone buzzed with a text from her boyfriend, Michael. "Everything okay? You've been gone a while." Sarah stared at the screen, wondering how to even begin explaining that her life had just imploded. Instead, she typed, "Family emergency. Might be out of touch for a few days. Love you." She started the car and pulled away from the house she'd grown up in, the house that suddenly felt like it had been built on quicksand. In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of her father standing at the window, watching her go. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over as she turned the corner, heading toward her aunt's house where her mother had taken refuge. Sarah had always prided herself on being strong, on having it together. But right now, she felt like that smashed photo frame, something that once held a beautiful image, now in pieces on the floor. The Chicago wind cut through Sarah's coat as she stood outside the brick apartment building in Wicker Park. She'd spent 3 days in a downtown hotel, gathering her courage, rehearsing what she might say. Now that she was here, every practiced word had abandoned her. She double-checked the address on her phone, the result of a social media search that had led her to Thomas Parker, a junior at Northwestern studying engineering. Just like their father had. Sarah pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B, her heart hammering against her ribs. A crackly voice came through the speaker. "Hello. Hi. I'm looking for Thomas Parker." A pause. "Who's asking?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Someone who needs to talk to him. It's important." Another pause, longer this time. Then, 3rd floor. The buzzer sounded, and Sarah pushed through the door into a narrow hallway with chipped green paint and the smell of someone's curry dinner. The elevator was out of order. A handwritten sign taped to the doors apologized for the inconvenience. So she took the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the 3rd floor, a door was already open. A young man leaned against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. He was tall and lean, with their father's jawline and their grandmother's eyes. Sarah stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "Can I help you?" Thomas asked, eyebrow raised. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. Sarah couldn't speak for a moment, taking in the face that echoed her own in subtle ways. The set of his mouth, the slope of his nose. "Are you Thomas Parker?" she managed finally. "Yeah, and you are?" "Sarah Miller." She hesitated, then added, "David Miller is my father." Thomas straightened, uncrossing his arms. His expression shifted from wary to confused. "Okay, he's your father too." The words hung in the air between them, stark and irrevocable. Thomas stared at her, his face a study in disbelief, then anger. "That's not funny," he said, his voice tight. "I'm not joking." Sarah pulled out her phone, opened her photos, and turned the screen toward him. "This is him at my college graduation 2 years ago." Thomas took the phone, his hands visibly shaking. He stared at the image of David, arm around Sarah, both in formal attire and smiling broadly. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, followed by a wave of something darker. "Come in," he said abruptly, turning and walking into the apartment. Sarah followed him into a small but tidy living space. Textbooks were stacked on a coffee table, and a laptop sat open on the kitchen counter. A Northwestern pennant hung on one wall. Thomas paced the length of the room, still holding her phone. "This doesn't make sense. My dad lives here in Chicago. He travels for work, but he's been here my whole life." "Not all of it," Sarah said quietly. "He's been living a double life. Boston with my mom and me, Chicago with your mom and you." Thomas shook his head. No way. My parents split when I was 5, but he's been here. He comes to my games. He helped me move into this apartment. And he helped me move into my first apartment in Boston." Sarah sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "He's been dividing his time between us for decades." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture their father used when stressed. "This is insane. Why should I believe you? You could be anyone." Sarah nodded. "Fair enough." She pulled her driver's license from her wallet and handed it to him. "Look me up online if you want. I'm a graphic designer at Palmer Associates in Boston. I have the same birthday as you, just 3 years earlier. May 12th, right?" Thomas's face paled. "How did you know that?" "I found you on Instagram. Your mom posted birthday wishes last year." Sarah leaned forward. "Thomas, I only found out about you 5 days ago. My uncle let it slip at Thanksgiving. I've been just as blindsided as you are right now." Thomas sank into an armchair across from her, still clutching her phone and license. "So what? You decided to fly to Chicago and drop this bomb on me. Thanks a lot. Would you rather not know?" Sarah asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. "No, I guess not." He handed back her phone and license. "Does my mom know you're here?" "I don't know your mom. I don't know if she knows about me either." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Oh, she knows. She has to." He stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a framed photo. He handed it to Sarah. This is from last Christmas. The photo showed Thomas, an elegant woman with dark hair, and their father, standing in front of a Christmas tree. They were smiling, a perfect family portrait. Sarah's stomach twisted. He was with us on Christmas Eve, she said softly. He flew out that night. Said he had an early meeting in New York the next day. She looked up at Thomas. He missed our Christmas morning for yours. Thomas took the photo back, staring at it with new eyes. Everything's a lie, isn't it? Not everything, Sarah said. Just a lot. Does your mom know about us? She knew about your mom, apparently. Some kind of arrangement. But she didn't know about you. That was the breaking point. Thomas sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. My mom always said they split because of his work, because he traveled too much. He looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes. But he never actually left her, did he? He was just going to his other family. Sarah nodded. Looks that way. Jesus. Thomas stood again, unable to stay still. I need a drink. You want one? Sure. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 beers. They drank in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared discovery settling around them. So what now? Thomas finally asked. Sarah shrugged. I don't know. I just needed to see you. To make it real, I guess. Well, I'm real. Thomas's smile was tight, but genuine. Unfortunately for both of us. Has he called you? Since Thanksgiving? Thomas nodded. Yeah, normal stuff. Asked about finals. Told me he'd be here next weekend. His expression darkened. He's been lying to my face my entire life. Join the club. Sarah took another sip of beer. He wants to explain himself to me, but I'm not ready to hear it. What about your mom? Helen, Sarah supplied. She's staying with her sister right now. She's pretty devastated. Thomas was quiet for a moment. What's she like? Your mom. She's kind, soft-spoken, works as a librarian, makes the world's best apple pie. Sarah smiled sadly. She didn't deserve this. Neither did my mom, Thomas said firmly. Diane. She's tougher, runs her own interior design business. But she loved him. Still does, I think. They lapsed into silence again, 2 strangers connected by blood and betrayal, trying to reconcile the father they knew with the man who had deceived them all. He's coming here next weekend, Thomas said suddenly. You should stay? We should confront him together. Sarah looked at her half-brother, the words still strange in her mind, and saw determination in his eyes. The same determination she felt growing inside herself. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Thomas's apartment felt smaller with 3 people in it. Sarah sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Thomas stood by the window, staring out at the Chicago skyline. Their father sat between them in the armchair, looking shell-shocked. I don't understand, David said for the 3rd time. How did you 2 find each other? Sarah finished. I told you, Dad. I came to Chicago after our fight. But why didn't you tell me you were coming here? His voice was strained, desperate. Thomas turned from the window, his expression hard. So you could warn Mom? Get your story straight. David flinched. That's not. Save it. Thomas cut him off. For 20 years, you've been living this elaborate lie. Going back and forth between Boston and Chicago like it was normal. Making us both think we had a regular dad who just traveled a lot for work. He shook his head. Did you ever mix up details? Call Sarah by my name? Forget which city you were supposed to be in. David's shoulders slumped. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Sarah asked, her voice quiet but firm. Help us understand, Dad. Because right now, all we see is a man who couldn't choose, so he decided to have everything at everyone else's expense. David looked between his 2 children, the physical similarities between them more apparent now that they sat in the same room. He seemed to age before their eyes, the carefully maintained facade crumbling. I never meant to hurt either of you, he began. It started simply enough. Your mother and I, Sarah, we married young, for practical reasons more than passion. We cared for each other, but there was always something missing. So you found it with my mom? Thomas asked. David nodded slowly. I met Diane on a business trip. It was supposed to be a brief thing, but we fell in love. Real love. When she got pregnant with you, Thomas, I panicked. I should have made a clean break then, but I couldn't bear to leave Sarah. She was only 5. So instead, you created this whole double life, Sarah said. Did Mom really know about Diane? David looked at his hands. Yes and no. She knew I had someone in Chicago. We had an understanding. She could pursue her own happiness, and I would pursue mine, but we would keep our family intact for your sake. What she didn't know was about Thomas. That was the line I shouldn't have crossed. Thomas laughed bitterly. So I'm the mistake in this scenario? No. David looked stricken. Never. You're my son, and I love you. Just as I love Sarah. That's why I couldn't give either of you up. But you weren't fully present for either of us, Sarah pointed out. You missed half our lives. David ran a hand over his face. I tried to be there for the important things. Your graduations, your birthdays, my Northwestern acceptance, Thomas said. Her engagement party last year. You were engaged? David looked at Sarah in confusion. She twisted the ring on her finger, the one he hadn't noticed. 3 months ago, Michael proposed at the Gardner Museum. Mom threw us a party. You were there, Dad. David closed his eyes briefly. The weekend after Thomas's engineering showcase. He sighed. I'm sorry. There's been so much happening lately, with both of you reaching these milestones. That you've been stretched too thin? Sarah supplied. That's been the story of our entire lives. We just didn't know why. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas glanced at Sarah, a silent communication passing between them despite their short acquaintance. That would be Mom, Thomas said. I called her after you arrived, Dad. David stood abruptly. Diane is coming here? Now. Not just Diane, Sarah said quietly. I called Mom too. She flew in this morning. David's face drained of color. Helen is here? In Chicago. Thomas moved to answer the door. We thought it was time everyone met. The whole family together, finally. He opened the door to reveal 2 women standing in the hallway. One was the elegant dark-haired woman from the Christmas photo, Diane. The other was Helen Miller, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, her blue eyes, so like Sarah's, wide with apprehension. The women looked at each other, then at David, who seemed frozen in place. Hello, David, Helen said softly. It's been a long time since I've seen you in Chicago. Diane stepped into the apartment first, her posture rigid. Helen, you look well. As do you, Helen replied, her Boston accent contrasting with Diane's Midwestern tones. The tension in the room was palpable as the 2 women who had unknowingly shared a husband for decades came face to face. Sarah moved to stand beside her mother, while Thomas closed the door behind them. I think, Diane said, her voice controlled but trembling slightly, that we all have a lot to discuss. David looked like a man facing a firing squad. I can explain, can you? Helen interrupted, surprising everyone with the steel in her voice. Can you explain 20 years of lies? Can you explain how you justified having a son you never told me about? Can you explain how you managed to compartmentalize your life so completely that you could smile at me across the breakfast table, then fly here and do the same with Diane? David seemed to shrink under her words. I thought I was protecting everyone. You were protecting yourself, Diane said, moving to stand beside Thomas. Her hand found her son's shoulder. I always wondered why you refused to move in with us, even after Thomas was born. Business in Boston, you said. You never mentioned that business included a wife and daughter. Sarah watched her father struggle for words. This man who had always seemed so confident, so in control. Now he looked lost. I love all of you, he said finally. That's the truth. It's messy and it's complicated, but it's the truth. Love isn't enough, Helen said. Not when it comes with so many lies. Thomas cleared his throat. I think we should all sit down. There's a lot to process here. They arranged themselves awkwardly in the small living room. Helen and Sarah on the couch, Diane in the armchair, Thomas perched on its arm. David remained standing, a man without a place. I want to know everything, Helen said. No more secrets. No more lies. So do I, Diane added. Starting with when exactly you plan to tell us about each other. David looked between the 2 women, then at his children. For the first time in his life, he had nowhere to hide, no schedule to check, no excuse to make. His carefully constructed worlds had collided, and all he could do now was face the wreckage. I never planned to tell you, he admitted. I thought I could keep this going forever. The honesty hung in the air, painful but necessary. Outside, the Chicago afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room as the 5 of them sat together. A broken family trying to figure out what, if anything, could be salvaged from the ruins of their shared past. Night had fallen over Chicago by the time the initial shock wore off. They'd moved from Thomas's apartment to a quiet restaurant a few blocks away. neutral territory where they could talk without the walls closing in. The small Italian place was mostly empty, allowing them a corner booth where their conversation wouldn't be overheard. Sarah watched her mother pick at her pasta, barely eating. Across the table, Diane seemed to be having the same problem. Only Thomas ate with any real appetite, though his movements were mechanical, his eyes distant. "So," Helen said, breaking a long silence. "When did it start?" "The exact truth, David." David set down his water glass. In the restaurant's dim lighting, the lines in his face looked deeper. 23 years ago, a conference in Chicago. I was supposed to stay 3 days. I met Diane at the hotel bar. Diane nodded, confirming. "He told me he was married, but that it was complicated. Said you had an arrangement." She looked at Helen directly. "I believed him because I wanted to. I'm sorry for that." Helen's smile was sad. "We did have an arrangement of sorts. After Sarah was born, things changed between us. We discussed openness, but with rules. Honesty being the primary one." She turned to David. "What we didn't discuss was you starting another family." "I never meant to," David said. "But when Diane told me she was pregnant." He trailed off, looking at Thomas. "You could have told me then," Helen said. "We could have figured something out." "Would you have stayed if you knew?" David asked. Helen was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, but you took that choice away from me." Sarah watched her parents with new eyes. The perfect marriage she'd thought they had, cordial, stable, if not passionately romantic, had been a carefully maintained facade. "I want to know how it worked," Thomas said suddenly. "The logistics. How did you keep us all separate for so long?" David sighed. "My job made it easier. Regular travel was expected. I split my time, 3 weeks in Boston, 1 week in Chicago, roughly. When Thomas was born, I took a longer business trip. When you had pneumonia at 12, Sarah, I told Diane I had an extended conference in Europe." "And the finances?" Diane asked. "Helen and I have been comparing notes. Neither household was struggling. I did well," David said simply, "and lived modestly in both places. No extravagance meant no questions." "Except the extravagance of maintaining 2 families," Sarah pointed out. David had no response to that. "All those times you couldn't make it to my swim meets," Sarah said. "Or my art shows in high school. Were you with them?" "Sometimes," David admitted. "And Thomas, all those weekends I couldn't make your baseball games, you were with them." Thomas finished, his voice flat. "I tried to balance," David said weakly. "To be fair." "Fair?" Thomas's laugh was bitter. "You think any of this was fair? To any of us?" "No," David said quietly. "It wasn't." The waiter came to clear their barely touched plates, the clatter of dishes a welcome interruption to the tension. When he left, promising to bring coffee, Diane leaned forward. "I have a question for Helen," she said. "Did you ever suspect?" "About Thomas, I mean." Helen considered this. "I suspected something. There were inconsistencies over the years, calls at odd hours, receipts that didn't make sense. Once, a woman's voice in the background when David called from the office. She looked at Diane. "Was that you?" Diane nodded. "Probably. About 8 years ago, Thomas had just made the varsity baseball team, and we were celebrating. I remember that day," Helen said softly. "I almost called you back to ask who the woman was, but I was afraid of the answer. I chose ignorance." "We all make choices to protect ourselves," Diane said. There was no accusation in her voice, just recognition of a shared experience. Sarah looked between the 2 women, struck by their dignity in the face of this betrayal. Their anger was controlled, their pain channeled into understanding rather than recrimination. It made her own anger seem childish in comparison. "What happens now?" she asked. "To all of us." The question hung in the air as the waiter returned with their coffees. They each doctored their cups in silence. Helen with a splash of cream, Diane with 2 sugars, David black. Even these small habits seemed meaningful now, fragments of lives kept separate for too long. "I can't speak for Helen," Diane said finally, "but I know what I want." She looked at David steadily. "I want you to move out of my house in Chicago. Completely. No more half measures. You need to choose where you're going to live, and it won't be with me." David's face fell. "Diane, I'm not finished," she said calmly. "I don't hate you, David. I probably should, but 20 years is a long time to love someone. That doesn't disappear overnight. But I won't share you anymore. Not now that I know the full truth." Helen nodded. "I feel the same way. The apartment in Boston is yours for now. I'll stay with Judith until we figure things out. But our arrangement, such as it was, is over. David looked stricken. So that's it. After all these years, both of you are just done. What did you expect? Thomas asked. That we'd all become one big happy family? That Mom and Helen would take turns having you over for dinner? No, of course not, David said. But I thought, you thought we'd forgive you, Sarah said, understanding dawning. Because we love you. David's silence was confirmation enough. We do love you, Helen said gently. But love isn't unconditional when trust is broken this thoroughly. You build a house of cards, Diane added. You had to know it would collapse eventually. The waiter brought their check. David reached for it automatically. This final act of provision a reflex after decades of supporting two households. No one objected. As they prepared to leave, an awkward question arose. Where would everyone go? 2 hotel rooms held Helen and Diane. Thomas would return to his apartment. But David, for perhaps the first time in 20 years, had nowhere he truly belonged. You can take the couch at my place, Thomas said finally. Just for tonight. David looked at his son, gratitude and shame mingling in his expression. Thank you. Outside the restaurant, they stood in a loose circle, 5 people connected by blood and betrayal, unsure how to say goodnight. Tomorrow, Helen suggested, we should meet again. There's still a lot to discuss. Diane nodded. Financial matters, at the very least. And family ones, Sarah added, glancing at Thomas. I'd like to get to know my brother, if that's okay with everyone. Thomas's smile was small but genuine. I'd like that too. They parted ways under the glow of a street lamp. Helen and Sarah to one hotel, Diane to another, David and Thomas toward the apartment. As Sarah walked away with her mother, she glanced back to see her father and half-brother moving side by side, not speaking, 2 shadows against the city lights. Are you okay? She asked Helen, linking her arm through her mother's. Helen's exhale created a small cloud in the cold night air. No, she said honestly. But I will be. We all will be, eventually. Sarah wanted to believe her, but as they walked through the windy Chicago streets, the future seemed as unclear as the path ahead. Morning light filtered through the curtains of Helen's hotel room as Sarah scrolled through the photos on Thomas's Instagram account. She'd been up since dawn, unable to sleep, her mind racing with everything that had happened. There was Thomas at a Cubs game, Thomas hiking in Michigan, Thomas with friends at what looked like a college party. A life parallel to hers, yet entirely separate until now. A soft knock at the connecting door preceded Helen's entrance, already dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, her hair neatly arranged. Despite everything, she maintained her composure, a trait Sarah had always admired and now understood came from years of practiced self-control. Did you sleep? Helen asked, sitting on the edge of Sarah's unmade bed. Not really. Sarah set her phone aside. Did you? A few hours. Helen smiled faintly. I've had practice lying awake, wondering about your father's other life. The difference is now I know. Sarah reached for her mother's hand. I'm sorry, Mom. Don't be. None of this is your fault. Helen squeezed her daughter's fingers. Thomas seems like a good young man. He does, Sarah agreed. It's strange, we just met, but there's something familiar about him. The way he moves his hands when he talks, how he tilts his head when he's thinking. It's Dad, but it's also not. Nature and nurture, Helen murmured. You share half your DNA, but you grew up in different environments. Sarah hesitated before asking the question that had kept her awake. Are you angry with me for finding him? For bringing all this out in the open? Helen considered this. I was briefly. It would have been easier in some ways to continue as we were. But easy isn't always right. She looked directly at Sarah. The truth is, I've been living in limbo for 20 years. There's a certain relief in finally having everything exposed. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Coffee? There's a place near your hotel. Just us. She showed the message to Helen, who nodded encouragingly. Go. Get to know your brother. I'm meeting Diane for breakfast anyway. You are. Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. Helen's smile was sad but determined. We have a lot in common, it turns out. And some decisions to make about your father. Sarah got ready quickly, throwing on jeans and a sweater, pulling her hair into a ponytail. The coffee shop Thomas had suggested was only a block from the hotel, a cozy place with exposed brick walls and the rich scent of freshly ground beans. He was already there, 2 cups on the table in front of him. He stood when he saw her, an awkward half-wave accompanying his uncertain smile. I got you a latte, he said as she sat down. I wasn't sure what you liked. Latte's perfect. Thanks. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug. How was last night? With Dad? Thomas grimaced. Uncomfortable. He tried to explain himself again, as if saying the same things in different ways would somehow make it better. He took a sip of his coffee. He slept on the couch. Left early this morning to give me space. Whatever that means. It means he's scared, Sarah said. I've never seen him like this before. So vulnerable. Yeah, well, his house of cards collapsed. Thomas studied her face. You look tired. Didn't sleep much. Sarah attempted a smile. Too busy stalking you on social media. Thomas laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. Find anything interesting? You played baseball in high school. You like the Cubs. You went hiking in Michigan last summer. She shrugged. Normal stuff. No dark secrets. Unlike our father. Thomas's smile faded. I did the same, you know. Looked you up online. Found your design portfolio. You're really good. Thanks. Sarah felt oddly pleased by his approval. Engineering, huh? Dad must have been proud. Following in his footsteps, Thomas said with a hint of bitterness. Or half his footsteps, I guess. They fell silent for a moment, the weight of their shared heritage hanging between them. Do you think they knew each other? Sarah asked suddenly. Our moms, I mean. Before yesterday. Thomas shook his head. No way. Mom would have said something. She was as shocked as I was. He paused. It's weird, isn't it? That they're having breakfast together right now. Very weird, Sarah agreed. But maybe necessary. They're the ones who've been most betrayed in all this. More than us. Sarah considered this. Differently than us. We grew up thinking we had a normal dad who traveled for work. They grew up sharing a husband without knowing it. Thomas nodded slowly. I keep thinking about all the times he wasn't there. My high school graduation, he was 2 hours late because of flight delays. Was he with you? Probably, Sarah admitted. My college graduation was in the morning. He might have caught an afternoon flight to make it to yours. She hesitated. Does it make it better or worse, knowing he was trying to be there for both of us? Worse, Thomas said immediately. Because he put himself in an impossible situation and then expected everyone to accommodate his choices. Sarah couldn't argue with that. What do you want to happen now? With Dad, I mean. Thomas stared into his coffee. I don't know. Part of me never wants to see him again. But another part. He trailed off. Still loves him, Sarah finished. I get it. Me too. He's the only dad we've got, Thomas said quietly. They drank their coffee in companionable silence, two strangers connected by blood and betrayal, trying to navigate the wreckage of their family's past. Tell me about Boston, Thomas said eventually. I've never been. Really? Dad never took you. The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. Thomas gave her a look. Think about it. His secret family was there. Of course he never took me. Right? Sorry. Sarah felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. It's okay. We're all adjusting to this new reality. Thomas leaned forward. So, Boston? Is it as snooty as they say? Sarah laughed, grateful for the change in subject. Parts of it. But it's beautiful, especially in the fall. The common is all red and gold, and you can walk everywhere. The history is right there on every street. I'd like to see it someday. You should come visit, Sarah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. When things settle down, I mean. I'd like that. Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting. It's Mom. She and Helen want us to meet them at the hotel. Dad will be there too. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. Did she say what? No, just that they've made some decisions they want to share with us. They paid for their coffee and walked back to the hotel in silence, both lost in thought about what might be coming next. In the lobby, they found their mothers sitting together on a sofa, talking quietly. There was no sign of David. Helen looked up as they approached. Sarah, Thomas, thank you for coming. She gestured to the empty seats across from them. We have something to discuss with you both. Diane nodded, her expression serious but calm. We've been talking, Helen and I, about the past, about the future, about David. Is he coming? Thomas asked, looking around the lobby. No, Helen said. We asked him to give us some time with you two first. Sarah sat down, her anxiety mounting. What's going on? You're scaring me a little. The two women exchanged a glance before Diane spoke. We've decided to file for divorce. Both of us. Simultaneously. Oh, Sarah said, unsure how to respond. It wasn't unexpected, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. We thought you should know before we tell your father, Helen added. We're meeting him for lunch to discuss the terms. Thomas leaned forward. Terms. Financial arrangements, mainly, Diane explained. We've agreed to approach this as collaboratively as possible. No fighting over assets or trying to punish him financially. Why not? Thomas asked bluntly. After what he did. Because bitterness won't heal any of us, Helen said gently. And because, despite everything, he's still your father. We don't want to destroy him or your relationship with him. Sarah looked between the two women with newfound respect. Their grace in the face of betrayal was humbling. There's something else, Diane said, her gaze shifting to include both Sarah and Thomas. We think it's important that you two have a chance to know each other. To be siblings, if that's what you want. We're planning to stay in touch ourselves, Helen added. It seems pointless to go back to being strangers after all this. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I'd like that. To know Thomas, I mean. Thomas nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Me too. Outside the hotel windows, Chicago continued its morning rush, people hurrying to work, to school, to appointments. Normal lives untouched by the seismic shifts happening within these walls. Yet within this small circle, something new was forming from the wreckage. Not one family fractured into pieces, but a different kind of connection, honest, chosen, and real. 3 months passed like a season changing, gradually at first, then all at once. Spring arrived in Boston, bringing with it cherry blossoms along the Charles River and a tentative sense of renewal. Sarah sat on a bench in the public garden, watching the swan boats glide across the pond as she waited for her mother. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Just landed. Taking an Uber to your place. This city is ridiculous. Why are the streets not in a grid? Sarah smiled as she typed back. Welcome to Boston, where cow paths became highways. See you soon. It was Thomas's first visit, timed to coincide with Sarah's postponed engagement party. Michael had been understanding about the delay, about the family crisis that had derailed their original celebration. He'd been patient as Sarah worked through her feelings about her father's deception, her newfound brother, the reshaping of her family's history. Helen appeared on the path, waving as she approached. She looked different somehow, lighter, Sarah thought. The strain that had lived in her eyes for as long as Sarah could remember had faded. Thomas texted, Sarah said as her mother sat beside her. His flight just landed. That's wonderful, Helen said warmly. I'm looking forward to seeing him again. How's Diane doing? Have you spoken with her recently? This was new too. Helen's genuine interest in Diane's well-being. The two women had developed an unexpected friendship, bonded by their shared experience and mutual respect. She's good. The divorce was finalized last week. She's thinking of expanding her business to New York. Helen nodded. Good for her. My papers should be done by the end of the month. She gazed out at the pond, reflective. It's strange. I was married to your father for 30 years, but I feel more myself now than I have in decades. You seem happier, Sarah observed. I am. Not because the marriage is ending, exactly, but because the pretense is over. Helen turned to face her daughter. There's freedom in truth, even painful truth. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a young family feed the ducks. Have you talked to Dad lately? Helen asked, her tone careful. Sarah nodded. Yesterday. He's settled into the new apartment in Cambridge. Wants to know if Thomas and I will come for dinner tomorrow night. And will you? Sarah sighed. Probably. It's still awkward, but it's getting better. Thomas is more angry than I am, I think. He's had less time to process, Helen pointed out. And he's younger. The betrayal feels fresher to him. I know, and I don't blame him. Sarah plucked a fallen blossom from the bench beside her, twirling it between her fingers. Sometimes I look at Thomas and see Dad, and it brings it all back. The lies, the double life. But other times I just see my brother. Sarah smiled. Who is, by the way, infuriatingly better than me at chess. Helen laughed. Your father would be proud. He always loved that game. The mention of David didn't sting the way it once had. He was still their father, still a presence in their lives, but the pedestal he'd occupied had crumbled. What remained was a flawed man trying to make amends for his mistakes. We should head back, Sarah said, checking her watch. Michael's picking up the food for tonight. Casual dinner before tomorrow's party. They walked together through the garden, past couples holding hands and children racing along the paths. Life continuing, as it always did. At Sarah's apartment, Michael was arranging takeout containers on the counter while chatting with a delivery person at the door. He looked up as they entered, his face breaking into a smile. Helen, perfect timing. Food just got here. Sarah loved him for this. His easy acceptance of her family's complexities, his steadiness in the face of chaos. Let me help, Helen said, moving to the kitchen to assist with plates and utensils. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Outside your building now. Apartment 3B, right? She texted back a confirmation and went to buzz Thomas in. A few minutes later, he was at her door, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a tentative smile on his face. Hey sis, he said, the term still new enough to sound both strange and right. Sarah pulled him into a hug. Welcome to Boston. Thomas looked around her apartment with interest as he set down his bag. Nice place. Very. Boston. What does that even mean? Sarah laughed. I don't know. Brick walls. Weird angles. That painting of what I assume is a historic landmark I should recognize. Faneuil Hall. Michael supplied, coming forward with his hand extended. I'm Michael. Great to finally meet you in person. Thomas shook his hand. You too. Thanks for letting me crash the engagement party. Are you kidding? Your family. Michael said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Helen emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Thomas, how was your flight? Long cramped. The usual. He accepted her hug with slightly less awkwardness than the last time they'd met. Thanks for having me, Helen. Of course. She gestured toward the table. Come eat before it gets cold. We want to hear all about your thesis project. They settled around Sarah's small dining table, passing containers of pasta and salad, falling into conversation that flowed more easily than any of them might have expected. Thomas told stories about his engineering program. Michael shared news about the community center where he worked. Helen mentioned her book club's latest selection. Normal family dinner conversation, Sarah thought with a hint of wonder. As if they'd been doing this for years instead of months. The topic of David hovered at the edges, unavoidable but no longer all-consuming. They spoke of him briefly, his new apartment, his recent retirement announcement, his efforts to make amends. He's seeing a therapist, Thomas mentioned during a lull. Twice a week. Good, Helen said, with genuine approval. That's a positive step. He asked if you might consider meeting him for coffee sometime. Thomas added cautiously. No pressure, just to talk. Helen considered this. Perhaps. Not right away, but someday. Sarah watched this exchange with a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for what had been lost. Hope for what might still be salvaged. Not the family she'd grown up believing in, but something new, something honest. After dinner, they moved to the living room with glasses of wine. Thomas pulled out his phone to show pictures of his recent camping trip in Wisconsin. Michael shared the latest designs for their wedding invitations. The conversation flowed easily into the evening, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people who no longer felt the need to fill every moment with words. Later, as Helen prepared to leave and Michael cleaned up in the kitchen, Sarah found herself alone with Thomas by the window overlooking the street. Thanks for coming, she said quietly. It means a lot. Thomas nodded, his gaze on the city lights. Wouldn't have missed it. Besides, I needed to check out this Michael guy in person. Make sure he's good enough for my sister. And the verdict? He'll do. Thomas smiled, then grew serious. Are you happy, Sarah? After everything. She considered the question, really considered it. I am. Not in spite of what happened, but partly because of it. Does that make sense? Weirdly, yes. Thomas leaned against the window frame. Before all this, I had one parent who was partly there. Now I have two parents who are more honest with me, plus a sister I never knew I wanted. And I have a brother who cheats at Scrabble. It's not cheating if it's in the dictionary. Their laughter drew Helen's attention from the door where she was putting on her coat. She smiled at the sight of her daughter and the young man who was now, irrevocably, part of their family. I'm heading out, she called. Breakfast tomorrow before we start setting up for the party? Sounds perfect, Sarah replied. Love you, Mom. Love you too. Both of you, Helen added, including Thomas in her smile. After she left, Thomas helped Michael finish tidying up while Sarah made up the sofa bed. The domesticity of the moment struck her, how quickly they had adapted to this new reality, these new relationships. Later, as she lay beside Michael in the darkness of their bedroom, she whispered, Do you ever think about how one revelation can change everything? He turned toward her, his hand finding hers under the covers. Like finding out you have a brother you never knew about. Like that. But also, finding out that the story you thought was true never was. And somehow ending up with a better story anyway. Michael was quiet for a moment. Better because it's true? Better because it's ours, Sarah said. Because we chose it, instead of having it chosen for us. Through the wall, they could hear Thomas's soft snoring from the living room. Tomorrow, her father would join them for dinner. Awkward, uncertain, but trying. The day after, friends and extended family would gather to celebrate her engagement. Life continuing, reshaping itself around the truth rather than comfortable lies. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling Michael's steady breathing beside her, thinking of her mother's newfound peace, her brother's presence just a room away. The family she'd thought she had was gone, but in its place was something real, messy and complicated and honest. And for now, that was enough.